Hello plant friends, hope you guys are all doing well. In this episode we are going to talk about my biggest mistake uh, in planting and gardening, especially related to monsteras, also philodendrons, also acacias. But I would say this is probably the biggest mistake towards or regarding monsteras. So this is the mistake I did when I got into planting, and it took me a while to sort of like realize it and back off. And probably this is the mistake that killed the most plants for me, and a majority of those plants were probably monsteras as well. So my biggest mistake in planting is the thought that plants need soil, right? Right? There's tons and tons of potting soil out there. When you go to any gardening center, most of their plants are in potting soil. There's no special soil mix, right? It's just mostly potting soil. And I thought that, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I thought that plants needed soil, right? I thought that that's where they're like drawing all their water, but also that's where they're drawing all their nutrients. So if you weren't using potting soil, then the plant wouldn't get enough nutrients to grow. But but over time, I realized that's totally wrong. And here's some footage for you guys to enjoy.
So I'd like to talk about this variegated Monstera Alba or Alba today. And as you can see, this one is doing pretty well. Here are the older leaves. There are some areas of burnt, some damage, um, but there is a lot of good growth. Like a newer leaf, this one looks really nice. Nice leaf, a bit too white, maybe more than a bit too white. There's another leaf right here, and then the newest leaf is unfurling. Um, and I think the really fun part of this plant is actually what I have it growing in, which is basically all moss. Let me see if I can give you guys a better picture of it from the back side. So surprisingly, this plant has actually been sitting in just pure sphagnum moss for, I would say, about a year now. I remember when I got this one, I was really lazy to pot it. Either that or I didn't have enough perlite or bark around. But um, yeah, I had a lot of sphagnum moss, so I basically just covered the roots and then just placed it into this terracotta pot, anticipating that I would be less lazy in the near future and put it into a soil mixture. But I sort of just never got into it, and well, there we go. We just have it sitting in moss, not even completely covered. And what you can see is that with the new growth, after sitting here for a year or something, I think there's like 3 or 4 new leaves since it started, but it's growing really well, and you can see that the roots are sort of just like digging into the sphagnum moss here, and I think there's like some roots that are just like sort of sticking out. When the roots come and I guess they wiggle out of their pot or mixture or whatever, and they're just exposed to air, I really don't have an issue with that at all. I think that the roots that just get it, or they are exposed to air, they sort of just really harden up like something like this, and so they're kind of used to it. Um, so roots that come out and then get exposed to air, I really don't worry about. The worst thing that happens is that they dry up. But you should know that like the roots like these, since they've been in air for so long, they're hard like this. They do really poorly if you put them in soil. So I'll have to think about that if I ever propagate this one. That these roots they're probably gonna have to spend some time in water first to get some water roots before going to soil. Because with roots like these, my experience is that if you put them in I would say even like a 50% potting soil composition, they tend to rot really readily. So this moss I water every 2 weeks. I just kind of like pour in water and it just like, it gets really soaked. And then 2 weeks later, I do it again. I really don't even, dig my finger in. I don't really concentrate on it. The good thing about sphagnum moss is that it's just inherently very airy. So, you really don't have to worry too much about root rot, especially when you're putting it into a terracotta container that's also, not completely filled all the way. So root rot has basically been a non-issue and a non-concern for this plant. The only concern I initially had was whether the plant would have enough nutrients or the moss would retain enough water or moisture to keep feeding the plant. But I've gotten this plant, I've really learned that monsteras need way less water than we think, and they can tolerate really. I guess they can tolerate weeks of dryness without without showing much signs of, I guess, decay or harm. In regards to fertilizing, and I know that's a frequent problem or frequent question when people are using sphagnum moss, the moss inherently is not, it inherently does not have nutrients or, minerals or anything for the plant. I think in the last year, I've probably used Miracle-Gro fertilizer. I think I've used it about 4 times total. So every like 2 months or so, this guy gets some sort of fertilizer solution. And it's not even a complicated solution. It's just I just put the blue Miracle-Gro powder into the watering pot or container that I have, and then I just give it a dose. So I hope this one convinces you that these monsteras do really well in moss, and you don't need soil or potting soil at all. So some of you guys really don't care for the sphagnum moss look or like to have it. So let's move on to this one. This one has a couple plants. I think I have like a fibrosum in there. This is my Monstera Aria. And let's look at this soil composition. If I can, move this away. All right, so this soil composition is basically all perlite and bark, right? There's some sphagnum moss in there, but minimal. So basically almost all perlite and bark. And this plant does equally, or these plants do equally well in this. And I also water this about twice a month. And again, the benefit is that the perlite and the bark, they together make a very airy mixture. So sort of that is what I've come about after, that's currently where I am in my planting journey, is that for monsteras, I really try to keep them on. I don't think I purposely keep them on the drier side, but I do. I am much more okay with them being on the drier side. I think they tolerate dryness much more readily than they tolerate wetness in terms of whatever they're sitting in. So again, yes. So my Aria is sitting in this bark and perlite solution or composition, and then my Alba, is sitting in this pure sphagnum moss. Right? They're both getting they're both happy. They're both getting watered about once every 2 weeks, and they both get some diluted Miracle-Gro solution every every like 2 months or so.
All right, guys, I hope that was really helpful. So just in recap, one, Monsteras really love a very airy soil or, potting mixture composition, whether or not that potting mixture has soil or potting soil at all, right? So that's one, really, really focus on the airiness. Two is that I think these plants survive in drier environments, or they survive in between waterings much better than you think, right? So it's always, always better to err on the side of watering less than to water more. With my Alba Monstera that I had in the sphagnum, I think I could water that every 2, 3 days or 4 days or so, and I would probably still be fine, just because the spag is so airy. I think my other mix with just the perlite and just the bark, if I wanted to, I could water that every couple days as well, just because that mixture is so well draining. It just like the water just sort of just goes through. So in those compositions, they're much more safer for people who have a need to overwater or have a tendency to overwater. But yeah, guys, I mean, they just don't need the potting soil. I think that is a false it's a false ideal or idea that most of us have, especially when we're just getting into plants. Yeah, and they also don't need that many nutrients. I feel like a lot of people talk about nutrient deficits whenever the leaves are browning or yellow or something, right? They're like, oh, it's a mineral deficit or a nutritional deficit. I really don't think that is as common as people think, right? I think it's like people think it's like 80% common. I think it's about like 5% or less common that nutritional deficiency is the problem for your plants. And so basically in the two pots that I showed you guys, again, I use fertilizer about every 2 months, and they're fine. If I forget, then well, they go 3 months. Sometimes they go 4 months without any fertilizer at all. Is this ideal? Was that Albo in a pot of sphagnum? Is that the ideal way to grow it? Probably not. But that's where it's at, and I'm sort of too lazy to change it right now. And it goes to show that a lot of things can work. A lot of soil compositions or mixture compositions or potting mixtures can work as long as you stick to the basics and the principles, right? Just airy, well draining, and then drier instead of wetter, I would say, would be the third point. All right, so that's gonna be it for this episode, guys. Again, just I have a couple T-shirts on. Just show it all. I have a couple of T-shirts on Amazon and also on Teespring, which is like linked below or something like that. And if you guys like it, please get one and support the channel. That's it for this episode. Till next time, happy planting.